Continuing our journey in building upon the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran, whereby the person who begins to reflect and read the Quran and more so begins to implement the Quran begins to find yajid al-halawa, begins to find this sweetness inside their life. And the opposite begins to happen in the life of the individual, that a person who stays away from the Quran, person who doesn't recite the Quran, then their life becomes bitter. And that is what is going to be today's discussion about the sweetness of the Quran, or unfortunately the bitterness of staying away from the Quran, how some of us could have a bitter life. The sweetness of the Quran isn't just something that Muslims can perceive. At times you find that even non-Muslims begin to see the hilawa, the sweetness of the Quran. Even amongst the rancors of the enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, you find that these individuals who fought and strove against him, they still used to be impacted by the Quran. If you look at amongst the five main enemies towards Islam, you find amongst them Al-Walid ibn Mughira, this individual, strategic leader that we find who as a side point we're going to come to the end, is the father of Khalid ibn Walid. At a certain stage of his life, he was a disbeliever, and at the end of his life, he becomes one of the most ultimate warriors of Islam. And his father is one who showed immense hatred towards the Prophet ﷺ. As Ibn Kathir and other ulama tafasir, they mention that when certain verses of the ayat were sent down from Surah Ghafir, then he didn't know how to respond to this ayat. And he made this statement, إِنَّ لَهُ لَحَلَاوَةً إِنَّ لَهُ لَطِلَاوَةً, with the ta, elegance. Imagine this is an enemy. When he hears the Quran, he's saying this Quran has a sweetness and it has an elegance that I don't know how to respond to this. That's why the majority of ulama mention that the response is at Surah Al-Muddathir. That when he mentioned his statements, إِنَّهُ فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ نَظَرَ ثُمَّ عَبَسَ وَبَصَرَ ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ وَاسْتَكْبَرَ فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرُ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا قَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ. That was his response. He began to ponder and reflect. When the people began to say that Walid ibn Mughira is swaying towards the Quran, and no fakkar wa qaddar, he said, how am I going to respond now to the people? I can't show affection towards the Quran. I can't show that I'm listening to the Quran. I need to say something to the people. So he begins to ponder, begins to reflect. He begins to think, what response am I going to give? So he gives a response. This is only a statement of a human being. This is a person who's possessed with magic, that this is what this speech is. And the response is given by Allah, Uslihi saqar, your reward is going to be, this is going to be your reward. And that isn't the first time that we find that these individuals have this stance towards the Quran. Allah even mentioned that we know that these individuals, what they say towards you, it's not about you. Don't get worried about what the statements they make towards you. But these individuals that you find, وَلَكِنَّ الظَّالِمِينَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ يَجْحَدُونَ. These individuals, oppressive individuals, trying to reject the ayat of Allah because they know deep down within themselves أَنَّ الْقُرْآنِ مُنَزَّلْ مِنَ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. They know that the Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they can't show that inside society. Because once again, they have their own purposes. They have their own agenda, their position, their wealth, their property. They can't show that there's going to be deliverance of wealth to the poor people. There's going to be a free market, a free society. There's going to be no oppression. There's going to be a boycott on alcohol, of drinking, of haram, of gambling, of people worshipping the idols. It's all tijara, it's business for them. An excuse that they give, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. These idols, we're not actually worshipping them. They only ways, mediums to bring us close to Allah. Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, Al-Hubal. All these are names which are derived from Al-Ilah, from Allah. Al-Aziz. These were the idols that they made, that used to make people believe, that worship these idols. And again, Ibn Kathir again narrates, speaking about the impact of the Quran. Abu Jahl, Abu Sufyan, Al-Akhnas. Once again, big leaders. Prophet ﷺ is reading the Quran outside the Kaaba. in the depths of the early morning. They hear his recital and they split away. They bump into one another. So what are you doing here? What if the Quraysh find out that we are all here? Ru'us of Quraysh, leaders of the Quraysh, we're here listening to the Quran. What will people say? Let's not meet up again. The following night again. Again, they're all there. Abu Sufyan, Abu Jahl, Al-Akhnas listening to the Quran. 3 nights. Ibn Kathir mentioned it. They were there listening to the Quran because they knew the impact of the Quran. Also we find Surah Al-Najm, the 53rd chapter Quran. وَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوهُ. Prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship Him. When the Prophet read these ayat, every person who was there outside the Kaaba, فَسَجَدَتْ جَمِيعُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُشْرِكِينَ وَالنَّاسِ وَالْجِنِّ أَجْمَعِينَ كما نقل في بعض الروايات في التفاسير. Everything prostrated. Except for one individual, Umayy ibn Khalaf. He was so arrogant. He didn't want to prostrate. He took the dust of earth from the ground and he put it on his forehead. What arrogance. Everybody is prostrated. The magnitude of the Quran is recognizing. وَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوهُ. Prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَفَمِنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ تَعْجَبُونَ وَتَضْحَكُونَ وَلَا تَبْكُونَ وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوهُ. Do you just marvel at this Quran? Do you just clap around this Quran? Do you just laugh around the Quran? Just think it's something great, that's it. What should the Quran do to the individual? فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوهُ. It should lead you to ibadatullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we mentioned, this concept of Quran just being barakah. There's one element of barakah of the Quran that is true. But there's this symbolic barakah. Just to play the Quran in the early morning, that business will be good. Just to play the Quran, to place the Quran in decoration. Ulama have a great discussion about the Quran is not to be placed as a form of beauty. Quran, the scribe of the Quran is not placed there for beauty. And to believe that the Quran written outside my door, outside my business, hanging on my Quran, Ayatul Kursi inside my car, that this is going to protect me. وَأَنْتَ مَا تُطَبِّقُ الْقُرْآنِ. And you don't implement the Quran, you don't live the Quran. You don't have your fair share of the Quran and think this is what all the Quran is. That some miraculous nature of the Quran will just preserve me in my life. This is what you call fables, myths. How they traverse inside a society that people take this as religion then. That as long as I had Ayatul Kursi inside my pocket, I had it inside my wallet, so I was protected. So my damage wasn't so bad. Because alhamdulillah, I was carrying Ayatul Kursi with me. That can be a dangerous belief. You're carrying Ayatul Kursi inside your heart and your mind. That when you're afflicted by some calamity, some difficulty, you are remembering Allah. You are praising Allah. You are thinking about Allah. That He is the one who helps. He's the one who aids. He's the one I implore. He's the one I call upon. He's the one I ask. That's what a believer is. And that's what the impact of the Quran is. But this individual, he couldn't see that. He was still arrogant. Didn't want to bow down. Arrogance, you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroys arrogant people. Mutakabbirin and zalimin. Read through history, read through the Quran. When you find people become arrogant, read through what happens to the end of these people. Not just nations, individuals. How they removed from the face of this earth. And Umayy ibn Khalaf was killed by who? By his own servant, who was set free by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, none other than Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi. Nimrud, they write inside works of tafsir that just a fly entered into his nose, who claimed to be one who disputed with Ibrahim alayhi salam, and said, I'm the one, the all-powerful, ana uhyi wa umit. I give life and I give death. Fir'aun, who said, look at these gardens of mine. Look at this river that flows underneath my palace. Look at Musa alayhi salam. He can't even speak. He has a speech impediment. Who is he to challenge me? Who is he to speak out against me? The great Fir'aun, the great powerful one. And what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do to Fir'aun? There he is, drowning in the depths of the Red Sea. And then he announces now, Al-an. Now you want to believe? فَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَدْنِكَ لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ عَنْ آيَاتِنَا لَغَافِلُونَ. Arrogant individual. How many signs did Fir'aun see inside his life? 9 ayat, 9 signs, continuous signs, bombarded with signs. Didn't want to accept. Didn't want to submit to the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus we find the sweetness of the Quran inside our lives. مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن ويعمل به كالأترجة. The Prophet lays out 4 types of individuals. The parable of the believer who recites the Quran. There's various wordings that exist there. Who recites the Quran ويعمل به, and acts according to the Quran is like a citrus fruit. وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ لَا يَقْرَأُ كَالتَّمْرَةِ. And the parable of a believer who doesn't read the Quran so often is like a date. Going back to the citrus fruit, it has a sweet smell and a sweet fragrance. The believer who doesn't read the Quran so often is like a date. Has no smell but has a sweet taste. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقَ وَمَثَلُ الْفَاجِرَ الَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ. And the parable of the hypocrite who reads the Quran and doesn't implement the Quran. كَالرَّيْحَانَةِ is like a basil, a herb. You find رِيحُهَا طَيِّبَةٌ. It has a good smell. وَلَكِنْ طَعْمُهَا مُرٌّ. It has a bitter taste. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ. Doesn't read the Quran, doesn't implement the Quran. كَالْحَنْظَلَةِ is like a cactus plant that grows in the desert, that has no smell. In other words, it has a bad smell and it has a bitter taste. These are the 4 types of individuals that are described towards their relationship towards the Quran. And the one who narrates this hadith is none other than Abu Musa al-Ashari. That's why we find everything about the companions is unique. The words they narrate, the things that they do, all unique in the right place if you study in great detail. Because Abu Musa al-Ashari is the one that the Prophet ﷺ said to him, لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ مِزْمَارٌ مِّن مَزَامِيرِ آلِ دَاوُودَ. You're the one who's been given one of the flutes, the beautiful sounds that were given to Dawood regarding recitation of his Quran. And this isn't the first person. Imagine this privilege of reading the Quran or the Prophet as I'm listening to the Quran. Imagine that sharaf. That the Prophet, the revelation is given to him and he's praising Abu Musa al-Ashari. He said to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, اقرأ علي. He says to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, read the Quran, recite upon me. He said, أقرأ عليك وقد أنزل عليك القرآن. He said, how can I recite the Quran when the Quran has been sent down upon you? He says, I want to hear from other than my own self. I want to hear from other than my own self. And so ulama have a great discussion about ta'thir al-Quran, hatta istima' al-Quran. About just listening to the Quran. Even you're proficient inside the Quran, sometimes you want to listen to someone else who recites the Quran. Because some people have a deep, not a deep voice, khushu inside their qira'ah. It has a ta'thir, it has an impact. Same ayat, you're going to hear them many, many times over. Someone else reads the verses, they have a different impact. He says, I began to recite the Quran from Surah An-Nisa. فَكَيْفَ إِذَا جِئْنَا مِنْ كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ بِشَهِيدٍ وَجِئْنَا بِكَ عَلَى هَؤُلَاءِ شَهِيدًا. If. Stop there. فَنَظَرْتُ إِلَى وَجْهِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. I looked at the blessed face of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. Why did he tell me to stop there? فكيف إذا جئنا من كل أمة بشهيد وجئنا بك على هؤلاء شهيدا. How will it be in that day? We bring all nations as a witness, and we bring you as a witness over all nations, over your own nation. I looked at his blessed face, and his tears were coming down from his blessed eyes. Tears were rolling down. How will it be day? Speaking al-khitab li-Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. How will it be on that day when you stand as a witness? Qira'at of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. He's recited, listening to it, and weeping over the Quran. Another occasion, Hisham ibn Hakim and Umar al-Khattab. When Umar is praying behind Hisham and he recites the Quran, Surah al-Furqan, in a different dialect. Hadith inside Bukhari, Umar is a strong personality. He's moving inside prayer. What is he reciting? As soon as the prayer is finished, he grabs him by the scruff of his neck and says, what are you reciting? What's this recital that you've done? This isn't the qira'ah that we read. So he said, this is how the Prophet, he taught me the Quran. He said, yeah, let's go to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And then the Prophet says to Hisham, Iqra, read. So he reads from beginning of Surah Al-Furqan. Umar then reads, he said, هَكَذَا أُنزِلَتْ. This is how the Quran has been sent down. But the point being, both of them recite, he listens and recited. He said the Quran has been sent down, sab'atu ahruf, has been sent down in 7 different dialects. 7 different modes of recital. Each mode is easy for each people of their own dialect. They learned and they studied it. And it begins to press more deeper meanings of the Quran. To give a simple example, whether it be Maliki Yawmiddin or Maliki Yawmiddin, both of them have a deep meaning. That a slight change has an impact. Likewise, find Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the only rare individuals who led the Prophet inside prayer, inside the Battle of Tabuk. And there wasn't enough time to find out which actual prayer did he actually lead, Fajr or another prayer whereby the Prophet heard his prayer. But who he did hear reciting the prayer was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Who we find that he said, Muru Abu Bakr fal yusalli bin nas. Let Abu Bakr lead the people inside prayer. So he said, Muru Abu Bakr, command him to lead the people in prayer. And his daughter Aisha said and came and said, no. When he leads the people in prayer, he weeps so much. We can't understand what he's saying. He gets so overwhelmed by the Quran. That's not a reason to stop the person from leading the people. He has the right to lead the people, as proclaimed by the Prophet ﷺ. And these are all examples. And to our young individuals who memorize the Quran, a journey to the Quran, those proficient in the Quran, I want to share something with you that maybe you can request on the day of judgment. You can ask the Prophet ﷺ. Maybe this dua has slipped our minds. Say, Ya Allah, give me the privilege to recite to the Prophet ﷺ. If you're memorizing the Quran, bear that inside your mind in your life. That, Ya Allah, give me the privilege that I've memorized your words. That I sit underneath the shade of a tree in paradise. Where by that shade it takes more than 100 years of a swift rider to go through it. And there is my messenger reclining at the bark of the tree. And he calls me over and says, who are you? I'm Hafiz so-and-so, Imam so-and-so. And he says to me, Iqra alayya. And he says to me, recite upon me the Quran. What a fadl, what a virtue. What a great blessing for those people of Quran. That their messenger, their leader, is saying, read the Quran, let me hear the Quran from you, how you used to recite it inside this dunya. That's what should drive a person to learn the Quran. And beyond that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, read the Quran, read my words. That's when you read the Quran, azamatullah, when you read the book of Allah. Read it with a presence. Anna Rabbi yarani wa yasma ilayya. Read it that my Lord is watching me. My Lord is listening to my qira'ah. listening to my observers, listening, looking straight through my soul and my heart. Now, how am I reading the Quran? That's why one of the men mentioned, I spent 20 years studying the Quran, reading the Quran, memorizing the Quran. I became tired. But the next 20 years of my life, I lived a good life. The next 20 years of my life, I had a great, good life because those first 20 years of struggling with the Quran, they had an excellent life after that. That's what you call barakatul Quran. That's what you call blessings of the Quran. That the Quran is driving you, gives you that sweetness. That's what the Quran gives to the believing individuals. وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنَ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. And the believer, many of us that is. The Prophet is a very practical individual. He's not saying everybody has to be on that benchmark. There's going to be moments where not everyone has that time. Don't read it so often. It still is going to be like a date. It's still sweet, but may not be bouncing, other people may not be bouncing over the impact of that individual. Where the first individual, you find that the four senses are there. Speaks about this hadith. Why is it citrus used example? فَاقِعُ لَوْنُهَا تَسُرُّ النَّاظِرِينَ. It glows, it's radiant, it's sweet, it smells nice, the texture, the smell, the taste. That's why this parable is given to the Quran person reads the Quran as being like utrujja, being like this fruit. All of its benefits are there. And a person has a desire for good fruits. What's the first thing inside paradise, inside Surah Al-Bakr is mentioned? Speaking about paradise. They're going to be given fruits inside paradise. That's what a person desires. And even his four senses become five senses if the person takes this literally as the Quran. The impact on life of the individual. And the second individual, Ulama said, تأثير القرآن الباطني والظاهري. The impact of the Quran internally and externally. Even you're not reading the Quran, you're implementing the Quran, trying your best to live by the Quran, and at some moments you're trying to listen to the Quran, you find it's going to benefit the individual. And that's what you find, وَمَثْلُ الَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. The one who continuously reads the Quran is in the verb present tense. And some ulama said it means it's continuous. You're continuously trying to recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَثُلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. As we mentioned, one who doesn't read the Quran is like the dates that we find. In a long hadith of wasaya of Abu Dharr, some of the narrations are questionable, some which are authentic. He asked the Prophet, give me some advice. Awsini, give me some advice to do it inside my life. What should I do? And numerous ahadith, long list of different wasaya, different advices are given. Amongst them that we find, عليك بتلاوة القرآن فإنه نور لك في الأرض. عليك بتلاوة القرآن. He said to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, upon you to read the Quran. تلاوة القرآن. Be excessive in doing that inside your life. Because this is going to be a form of nur for you upon this dunya. وَمَثُلُ الْفَاجِرِ أو وَمَثُلُ الْمُنَافِقِ الَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. We might be thinking, how's that plausible? How is it plausible? Al-munafiq alladhi yaqra'u al-Qur'an. A hypocrite who reads the Qur'an. We can't even imagine that. Can a person reading the Qur'an be a hypocrite? There were some hypocrites who used to attend Fajr behind the Prophet ﷺ so they wouldn't be sprouted. These are hypocrites at the time of the Prophet ﷺ who used to attend Salatul Fajr so they cannot be recognized. Annani munafiq. A person who was traveling, in kana musafiran or maridan or kana lahu udhr shar'i, that all the companions knew about his travel, he's gone away, he's sick, or there's something wrong. They knew that the absence was justified. Other than that, no one missed Salatul Fajr bil-jama'a khalf al-Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. Put that into context in our lives. That was a munafiq. Hypocrite. How many Fajrs in a week do we miss in the masjid behind the Imam? Ask ourselves that question. How many Fajrs have I missed this week behind the Imam? Bil Jama'ah. No, I got up on time and I prayed on time and I prayed there in my room, or I made my own Jama'ah at home. This week only. Count it on your fingertips. And I'm sure we can all conclude how many of these 7 morning Fajrs we were there. So don't think hypocrisy doesn't exist anymore. There's anwa'ul nifaq. There's gradients of hypocrisy. So there's going to be people who read the Quran. There's going to be people, what is the meaning of a munafiq shar'an? يظهر الإسلام وفي باطنه كفر والنفاق. تدمير الإسلام. He externally displays himself. ركزوا على هذا. He displays himself externally as a Muslim. فمثل المنافق الذي يقرأ القرآن. The parable of the Quran is like this karayhan and this basil fruit that we find, this herb. So as we mentioned, the hypocrites are those individuals who read the Quran. Like what we find prophesied by the Prophet, like some people read the Quran and would not go beyond their throats. It becomes a profession, it becomes an art, it becomes a skill. Also being proficient in reciting the Quran, and it has no impact upon the individual inside their life. It has not refined those individuals, and we find rather it gives a bitter taste when a person engages with these individuals. And then we find the person, وَمَثُلُ الْمُنَافِقَ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ, hypocrite doesn't read the Quran, كَالْحَنْظَلَةِ, is like this cactus plant, and some of the ulama of linguistics speak is known as the melon plant, or the plant of Abu Jahl's melon. That's the name that is given in some countries of this plant, whose smell is bitter and taste is bitter, and it grows on the top of the ground. So it's like an evil plant that's there, that exists there, alhamdulillah. That is the impact of that individual who doesn't read or the hypocrite who doesn't read the Quran, doesn't implement the Quran inside their life. And then finally that we find, where do we want to be from amongst these 4 types of individuals inside our lives? Do we want to try to search or impress upon certain people to become those individuals that we said to that individual, قالوا يعني لصاحب القرآن اقرأ ورتل, or we said to the person of the Quran, read and recite. كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا فإن منزلتك عند آخر آية تقرأ بها, أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Carry on reading and ascending, and wherever you stop reading, the final ayah you stop on will be your place inside paradise. Some ulama begin to discuss whether it's referring to anybody who recites the Quran, or like معظم الشراح, most of them go to the view, if not all of them, is referring specific to Hafidh al-Quran. The person who's memorized the Quran will be given that sharaf. And that's why if a person can't memorize the Quran, then they aid someone who's memorizing the Quran. They sponsor someone, in today's world, sponsor someone who's memorizing the Quran. Build an institute where people are memorizing the Quran. Facilitate the learning of the Quran. It's all ways of sharing that reward inside our lives. And thus we find that all these opportunities, that all these actions and opportunities are there. And as we began with Khalid ibn Walid, his father is a disbeliever, son becomes a believer. Were all companions memorizers of the Quran? No, they weren't. Each one had a special skill, a special niche, a special service. That's why we have to find our niche. Our niche inside this Islamic world. So many of us have been given so many skills of wealth, of mind, of property, whatever it may be, good health, strength. You need people to do that hard work. Everybody's created, placed in a different format in the way that they operate. That's how the Muslim Ummah is going to be together, that we find. And to avail the opportunities, especially generic opportunities. There's generic opportunities that exist for every single Muslim. Oh, why should I do something? I'm not a complete person. I'm a sinful person. I do this, I do this, I do that. We are all the same. Then none of us has the right to say anything. None has the right to do anything. None has the right to encourage people. Fuqaha have a long discussion. حتى أئمة والخطباء والعلماء, They say even scholars, leaders, imams, they have some discrepancy amongst them, but their good outweighs that discrepancy or that mistake they may have. They should not stop from ordering the good and forbidding the evil. That's a deception of the devil. That's befallen many of us. That, who am I? What's the point in me saying something about this? What's the point in me taking a stance? What's my impact going to be? And we're going to look at it in the following Jummah. We're there to talk about the impact of our lives. The impact of sins that we carry out inside our life upon ourselves and this Muslim ummah. And the good things that we do have impact upon this Muslim ummah.